For many home cooks, finding interesting side dishes to accompany their favorite proteins can sometimes be a challenge. On today's episode, I've got 3 of my favorites that are going to add a big pop of flavor and nutrition to many different menus. The first dish I'm going to make today is inspired by something I loved as a kid. My mom, hi Mom, called it Johnny Cake, but I prefer the more common name of cornbread for it. There are so many recipes out there, lots of variations, and this one, it happens to be my favorite right now. So we're going to start by greasing our baking pan. I'm using a 9-inch round cake pan, and I love this one because it's got a removable bottom, so it's easy to get the finished cornbread out. You can use mini muffin pans, regular muffin pan. If you double this recipe, you could use a 9 by 13-inch baking pan. Very flexible. And I'm going to grease my pan with bacon fat because I love the combination of the semi-sweet cornbread with bacon fat, and it helps to give it a really nice crisp edge. You could use any of your preferred things, butter, coconut oil, vegetable oil, olive oil, but you do want to grease it fairly generously so it doesn't stick. There we go. And I'm going to set that aside, and now we'll mix up our batter. So cornbread's very simple. We've got cornmeal, all-purpose flour. I like to use unbleached flour. People ask me quite often. I just find that it works really well for me. We've got baking powder, baking soda, and a little bit of salt. I sometimes cut back on the salt in my baking, but in this dish there's not very much salted butter added, so you need a little salt to balance it. Some white sugar. And I'm just going to give that a little stir. And now we're going to get our liquids ready. Here I've got some homemade buttermilk. I took a half a cup of milk and heated it to just above room temperature in the microwave. Then I added a little bit of vinegar, and then you get the lovely sort of coagulation that goes on and a bit of a separation, and it just gives the cornbread a much nicer, tangy kind of flavor. To that, I'm going to add 1 egg. And you definitely want your egg at room temperature. You're going to find that it beats up so much more easily. The whites seem to relax and they don't resist getting beaten up the same way. And now to make the assembly really quick, I'm going to get my add-ins ready. So I've got some minced chives here. You can use green onion tops if you have those on hand instead. And then I've got some pickled jalapenos. You could use fresh jalapeno, but again, I like the complex flavor of the pickled ones. And it doesn't take a lot because it's not a really big batch, but you could, if you prefer, add in more if you want a bit more heat. Pickled jalapenos, much to many people's surprise, are not actually very hot. We'll just get those back and ready. There we go. So now we're going to add our egg and buttermilk into our dry ingredients, followed by the butter, and then we'll have our grated cheddar, chives, and pickled jalapenos to add in last. In goes the melted butter. If you want to speed this dish up, you can get your dry ingredients and your wet ready ahead of time. Refrigerate things that need to be refrigerated, like the cheese and the buttermilk. And then it's just a matter of quick assembly right before it goes into the oven. This is a really easy batter to stir together. It's quite thick. It is like a cake batter, but not as thick as bread or cookies. And you just want to stir it until you can see that there are no more dry spots. And now we're going to put it in our pan. A thin cake like this will bake in about 16 to 18 minutes. If you're doing muffins, they might need a little bit longer, or a doubled recipe in a larger pan might need 22 minutes. Just going to smooth it out so it's nice and even. I'm going to pop this in my preheated oven and we'll check on it in about 15 minutes. All right, as you can see, I've taken the cornbread out of the oven and oh my gosh, it smells so good. I'm just going to lift it out of the pan. I showed you that removable bottom before, and it makes it so much easier to get it out, even though I'm making it look awkward. There we go. And you can serve this at just about any temperature you like, piping hot, lukewarm. I even like it straight out of the fridge. Another great thing about cornbread is that it freezes really beautifully, so you can make it ahead of time. Great for taking to a picnic, cottage, whatever. I love to have it on hand in the freezer pretty much all the time. So let's cut into it and get a piece on our plate. I like these round ones because I find a wedge of cornbread on a plate with other things really looks attractive. It's also a terrific side dish with chili, all kinds of things, really, really versatile. And another bonus is that cornmeal is really inexpensive. You'll find huge bags of it at most grocery stores. And one tip is that you probably want to store it in the freezer. It will spoil if you don't use it up fairly quickly. So I usually pour it into storage containers and just put it in the freezer, and then you can scoop out whatever you need when you're ready to make something like this delicious jalapeno and chive cornbread.
The next dish I'm going to showcase blends elements from several Asian cuisines to create a taste that hits all the right notes: hot, salty, sour, and sweet. Its base is soba noodles, which are a nutritious protein source.
To get more bang for your buck when zesting citrus, change it up. I've always done it this way: fruit on top, microplane below. But when you do that, as the zest falls, so too does all the essential oil. So now I've learned to switch it up. If you capture the zest in the microplane like this, you're also capturing the oil, so you'll get a lot more flavor. I love Asian-inspired dishes. It's a flavor profile that really, really appeals to me, and there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do with those basic tastes like sriracha and sesame oil and rice vinegar and so on. This soba noodle salad that I'm going to show you is the perfect sidekick for all sorts of things like grilled meats and fish and so on. So I'm going to start by showing you the cooked soba noodles. They are made from buckwheat. And buckwheat, despite its name, is actually gluten-free. If you want to be careful though and make sure that your noodles are gluten-free, read the package, because they sometimes mix it with white flour. And you can find them in most grocery stores and as well as specialty natural food stores. So these were cooked for about 5 minutes in a big pot of boiling water and then rinsed under cold water until they were cool to the touch. Then I wrapped them in a towel and put them in the fridge overnight to dry. So I'm just going to put these in the bowl and then they'll be ready for later. That's a lot of soba. That might be more than we need. A great way to make sure that you measure your pasta appropriately, and I should have done this myself, is to use a scale, and then you can measure out by weight as opposed to just trying to eyeball it. I chronically cook too much pasta, so I'm going to start to take my own advice. Now we're going to make the dressing, and because the noodles are going to be room temperature or even cold, we want a warm dressing to kind of perk them back up. So we'll start by turning on our pan. And to that, I'm going to add some rice vinegar. And don't mind the sound of the fan. That's just part and parcel of this operation. We've got some minced garlic. A little bit of salt. Because this doesn't have soy sauce in it like some Asian things, it's okay to add a little salt. Some white sugar to counterbalance the acidity of the vinegar. Some sesame oil for that nice big flavor pop. And in case you didn't know this, you should always store sesame oil in the fridge. It'll thicken a little bit in there, but it can go rancid in the cupboard. Now we've got a little bit of fish sauce. You want to be careful with fish sauce to either add it to things that aren't hot yet or take them off the heat before you add it. You don't want a big cloud of fish sauce steam coming up at you. It won't smell very appealing and it'll linger for a long time. And some sriracha. I'm putting in about half a teaspoon, I would say. If you want more heat, obviously you can add more sriracha. So we're just going to give this a little stir. And the intention is to not only warm the ingredients, but cook the garlic so it won't have that strong raw taste on our noodles. So I'm going to leave that to simmer, and now we're going to get the vegetable and fruit portion of our salad ready. So I'm going to start with about half an English cucumber. And you'll notice with a lot of Asian cuisines, there's always contrasts of texture and of color as well as flavor. And I really love that when it comes to dishes like this. You can cut the pieces smaller if you like. I want them to be visible in my salad, so that's why I'm doing half moon shapes. And we'll just add that to the noodles. Next up, we've got half a large red pepper. And if you haven't figured this out already, it's much easier to cut a red pepper quote unquote upside down. The skin is a bit resistant and you have to work your knife a little bit harder to get through it, but the inside is much more pliable, so I always cut them this way. And then we'll cut them crosswise to be in sort of bite-sized pieces. And we'll check on our dressing. Oh, it's heating up. I can hear it now. I'll just turn it down a little. And now we're going to peel a mango and add it. And you can use any kind of mango that you wish. It should be ripe. And obviously that's just a little gentle squeeze to figure that out. And you'll want to peel it. The peels on mangoes really aren't edible. All right, we've got our mango peeled. I'm just going to set that down for a minute and turn off our dressing because the garlic is cooked. And we're going to add in some lime juice to the dressing to finish it off. And lime zest. So, as we showed you, we're going to just zest it this way, upside down. What we think of as upside down, but it's really the right way, I now know. Tip that in. I really like a citrus reamer. You can get a lot more juice out of your fruit this way. And half a lime should do it for this. There we go. Okay, dressing is ready. Now when you go to cut your mango, you want to kind of use the geography of the mango to guide you. The pit is about the same shape here, so I know I can take some slices off each side of the pit and then slices off sort of the skinny ends as well. When you get too close to the pit, it becomes kind of fibrous and tough, so you want to try and avoid that. As you can see, I nicked the pit there, so I'll cut that part out. And you don't need too much mango. Everything should be in balance. Get a little bit more off the top here. And if you have big mango fans at home, my kids used to love to take the mango pit and get every last little bit of flesh off it. It was a great way to keep them busy for half an hour after I cut mangoes. All right, so we're going to cut these again in bite-sized pieces. All right, we have our mango all prepped, and I'm just going to add that in to the noodles and peppers and cucumbers. You can already see how colorful this salad is going to be. And the last thing we're going to do before we add the dressing is to get our final garnishes ready. So I've got some chopped peanuts. You can use cashews if you prefer, or just omit them completely. I've got some lime wedges if people want to have another little pop of lime. I'm going to coarsely chop some cilantro. You could use mint with this salad as well if you like. I just really like the cilantro combination with this dressing. Go. And finally some green onions for yet another bright flavor note. And fun fact, if you buy green onions and you like to use the green part more than the white, stick the white ends in a little glass of water and they will re-sprout fresh green tops for you. Yeah, I think that's going to be good. Okay. Time to assemble. Get this board out of the way. So I'm going to give this a pre-toss to mix in some of the veg. It's tricky because the noodles are a little bit sticky, but bringing them up to the top means they'll get dressed and then they'll be more manageable. And we'll drizzle our dressing evenly over top. There, and now it's much, much easier to toss. And as you're tossing it, make sure you bring up a little bit of each of the three add-ins, the peppers and cuke and mango, so that they're visible so people understand what they're getting themselves in for when they serve themselves. And now we will add our chopped herbs. I don't put on too much. You don't want to obscure the dish. You can always have the extra on the side for people. And some of our chopped peanuts. And then you can park the limes right in the bowl. Now our soba noodle salad with mango, cucumber, and red peppers is ready to be enjoyed.
Our third recipe today is a simple dish which I make often during tomato season and occasionally in the winter when I can get my hands on good quality tomatoes. Despite having few ingredients, it delivers a huge flavor.
This recipe is a great way to capture the flavors and the fun of summer pretty much all year round. We're really lucky that, certainly at least where I live, we can get decent tomatoes not just during those peak times of August, September, October. And I love to work with tomatoes, especially in the winter, just to, again, remind me that the growing season is coming. For this dish, you want to choose a meaty tomato that isn't too seedy and has firm flesh and not too much water. So I love heirloom tomatoes for this, and you can get them in lots of different colors, which makes this dish, of course, even more colorful. Another good choice is plum or Roma tomatoes that are used for a lot of Italian foods, pasta sauces, and so on, because they have that nice meaty texture. And even grape tomatoes, which are basically baby Romas, are another super option. The other key ingredient in this dish is brie cheese. And a couple words about brie. For this dish, it's absolutely fine to use what I would call grocery store brie, but if you want your dish to have a more complex flavor, look at the best before date. So young brie will be 45 days or more out from its best before date. Medium brie, I'll call it, is between 20 and 45 days, and mature brie, which has the best flavor and texture, is less than 20 days before its best before. So this one is just 10 days out. So I know it's going to have a more complex flavor, like I said, and it's going to be really good in this dish. So we're going to start by preparing our tomatoes. They've been washed, and now we just need to cut out the cores, and then we're going to chop them. And like I said, obviously farm fresh summer tomatoes are always going to be the best for everything, but because we're letting this dish marinate and adding in a few more components, it's absolutely fine to use winter tomatoes. I served this to a new friend last summer and 2 summers ago, and she ended up planting tomatoes and basil in her garden specifically so she could make this dish. So I thought that was pretty great. And the goal is for bite-sized pieces, probably what they would call in the restaurant biz about a 1/2 inch dice. And these tomatoes are fairly ripe, that's what you want. This one has quite a big core. I can feel it with my knife, so I want to make sure I get all of that out because it's going to be tough. There we go. All right, I'm going to put these in the bowl and then I'll cut the last one. And we were speaking about tomato gardening. My favorite variety to grow for dishes like this is one called Brandywine. It's similar to what people call beefsteak tomatoes, and they can be huge and they're so flavorful. So now when you go to cut the brie, sometimes people say you have to take the rind off. I disagree. There's a lot of flavor in there, and it's going to be very small surface area pieces, so it's not going to be difficult for people to eat it. It's also a soft rind, and it will get even softer. And what you want to do is cut them in pieces just slightly larger than your tomato, and I like to make them irregular shaped so that they don't look like they were cut by a machine. And I took the brie out of the fridge just a few minutes ago, so it's still nice and firm, which makes it easier to cut. All right, now we're going to add that to our tomatoes. This is definitely a dish that you can prepare somewhat ahead of time, and I'll explain about that a bit more in a minute. Our next component is going to be some fresh basil. That's really crucial to the flavor. And it also can be coarsely chopped. There's a lovely name for finely chopped herbs, and it's called chiffonade, and that's like little diagonal strips, but we're not going to worry about that today. I am going to just pile them up together, though, to make it easier to cut with as few knife strokes as possible. One down the middle, another one down the middle. There we go. It looks like a lot of basil, but by the time it gets distributed, it seems to be the perfect amount in my opinion. Okay, next up, some pepper, because that always goes well with tomatoes. And I do use a fairly generous amount because the dish enjoys the combination. And now we're going to add some salt. And I have a couple options here. I have a smoked sea salt, which is really lovely, has a great aroma. It's dark, which is kind of fun. I also have a truffle salt, which I really like. It brings that nice earthy, mushroomy sort of flavor. But today I'm going to go classic old school, and I'm just going to use fleur de sel, which has a really nice crystalline structure, and it distributes so well, and it'll dissolve nicely in the dish. And again, it's a generous amount, but appropriate for the dish. And last but not least, a good glug of olive oil. And that's all the ingredients you need. So we're going to give this a stir, and you just kind of want to make sure everything is coated with the oil and with the herbs and salt and pepper. That's the goal. I'm peeking down to the bottom. I want to make sure I can see a little bit of oil in the bottom. That way I know I've added enough. And break apart any pieces of cheese that might be stuck together. Okay, so now the trick is this needs time to marinate for the flavors to blend. If you're making it, let's say in the morning to serve at supper time, what I would recommend is leaving it on the counter for about half an hour, tuck it in the fridge for the rest of the day, and then about an hour and a half before you want to serve, take it out. Now that applies to a warmish kitchen, we'll say in summertime, for example. If it's wintertime and your kitchen is not so warm, it will need longer on the counter. I would say maybe 2 to 3 hours. Or if you're in a rush, you can speed it up by putting it in a barely warm oven for about 15 minutes or so. So that's what we're going to do, because I want to be able to show you the finished dish very soon. All right, so our tomatoes and brie and basil have had a chance to marinate a little bit. I did give them a nudge in the oven just to speed up the process, as I mentioned, and I can see the brie is getting nice and oozy and soft, and the tomatoes look beautiful, and there's lots of great juice in the dish. So my favorite way to enjoy this is spooned over slices of baguette, as I'm going to show you, but you can also fold in some cooked pasta. Orzo or macaroni or small shells are really great, and you've got an amazing pasta salad that is just going to blow people's minds. So let me load up a few little pieces of baguette here, and as you're going through the dish, try and get a little bit of everything. I really like to load them up. And this is delicious the next day. Of course, it'll marinate even more. The basil will discolor a little bit, but it doesn't impact the flavor at all. And we'll finish with just a little bit more pepper. And now we've got our fabulous tomato, basil, and brie dish that is so versatile and yummy. Taking the time to prepare a side dish that's a little bit more interesting is a great way to make a meal more memorable. Whether you try my yummy jalapeno and chive cornbread, this delicious tomato and brie concoction, or this fabulous soba noodle salad, you're sure to perk up your menu in minutes.